and that's where we're taking a call from today. So, hi, Michael, you're very welcome to the show.
Hi, and aloha, James.
Oh, aloha to you. Wow, what a beautiful part of the world you're in, Michael.
I'm on the big island of Hawaii, and it is really wonderful being here, and today's a beautiful Hawaii day.
Wow, Michael, great to hear your voice, great to talk to you today. I've had so many requests to get you on the show, and I get swamped. I can only do so many, but I got you here today. It's exciting for me because there's something very genuine about what you're doing, Michael. There's something very genuine, not only a non-profit organization, I understand that part, but there is a need for extraterrestrial political discussions, this exopolitics. And like I say, I don't know if it's fair to say you started the whole thing, but to say you pioneered it. There's so many groups, exopolitics around the world now. Tell me about the inception of the exopolitics infrastructure, I guess, first and foremost.
Sure. Well, for me, I was very interested in the political implications of extraterrestrial life when I first was introduced to this subject in May of 2001. I was very interested in how this impacted international politics, because that was the field of study that I was involved in, and I was actually teaching at an American university in international politics. And so it was very natural for me to kind of look at the information that I had been introduced to through Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project and see, well, how does this impact international conflict? And in particular, peace and conflict resolution, which was something that I was very interested in. And the more I studied it, the more it became very integral to understanding what it is that creates international conflict. And unfortunately, that interest was not something that was shared by my academic colleagues, who thought that I'd really kind of like lost it. And that led to me eventually being kind of forced out of the university system that I'd been involved in teaching or researching for a couple of decades, really. And I have since been involved in promoting exopolitics as a new discipline and started up that 501c3 organization, the Exopolitics Institute, and continue to write and research and organize courses and events concerning exopolitics.
Oh, wonderful. Of course, you have several books out, so much stuff in there. I guess, Michael, for me, there is a need. There's so much stuff. I mean, people can focus on UFO cases from conspiratorial to physical evidence to testimony, but inevitably, you know, there's famous cases like Roswell, and that's to name a few, and the Phoenix Lights, and, you know, people kind of flock to this stuff in terms of almost an obsession in terms of research. I can understand that, because people want to know, first and foremost, number one, are we being visited? Number two, is the whole thing real? Looking at the evidence, that you can brush some of it away, but you can't brush it all away. But inevitably, when you get past all that, the reality of it, you're going to have to deal with, okay, why are they here? What are we going to do about it? And whether subgroups on the planet, or what are we going to do with them when we come face to face? Are they wanting to meet with us? Are they want us to shake hands? Are they want to talk to us? I mean, is this the nature of exopolitics? Are these the serious questions we have got to grapple with?
That's exactly right, James, because what distinguishes exopolitics from ufology is that ufology is pretty much interested in the phenomenon of UFOs, accumulating data, evidence that this is a real phenomenon and that there is something worthy of deeper study and analysis in this phenomenon. And that's been going on for 6 decades now, since 1947. And basically, exopolitics takes a different approach, which is, okay, we have all of this data. Let's start analyzing it. Let's start putting together all of the testimonies of whistleblowers, contactees, leaked documents that take us beyond the purely kind of scientific analysis of UFO data into this realm of understanding, well, why are they here? Who's in these craft? What are they doing? Why are they contacting people? What do we understand about the different relations between these visitors with various governments and even amongst themselves? Is this something that promotes international peace, or is this something that promotes war and conflict? I mean, these are all the sort of questions that exopolitics needs to deal with. And more people are now becoming drawn to exopolitics because I think for a lot of people now, they have answered the question for themselves. Are UFO reals, and is there a substantive extraterrestrial component to this phenomenon? A lot of people have answered that question satisfactorily for themselves in terms of their own research, and now they're going into the deeper questions of, who are they, why are they here, what are they doing with us, and what are we doing in response?
Sure. Let's talk about individual countries. Obviously, exopolitics is a global phenomena. That's sprung up in several different countries. Each one has their own. Each country seems to have their own set of subgroups. And yeah, I mean, we can refer to you exopolitics.org to your website, Michael, if people want to see what this is all about. But inevitably, each country has their own mandate. How they're going to deal with this problem, because it is a problem. I mean, first of all, governments haven't acknowledged to their public dominion that this stuff is real. I think they're trying to slowly go through a disclosure process to ease the blow as such. But inevitably, let's talk, for example, UK, USA, Russia, three of the big ones. There's going to be a lot of different ways that each country handles either disclosure or managing the truth, if you want to call it that way. Or so what has exopolitics got to do with each country? Maybe talk about those three countries in particular. What's the exopolitics in the individual countries, and then maybe paint out how they three can get on a global scene and discuss things.
Sure. Well, when we're looking at those three countries in particular, Britain, the United States, and the Russian Federation, what we have to understand is that they were the victors from the Second World War. And when they went into the defeated Nazi Germany and started to look into what top secret projects the Nazis had been working on, they found that the Nazis had actually developed flying saucers, that the Nazis were the first to develop these craft. And they had done it successfully because they had been able to accumulate data beginning in the 1920s on these advanced craft that were found in the literatures of ancient societies, and also with communications with certain extraterrestrial civilizations. So this was something that became known to these different countries. Britain, in particular, in the late 1930s, they were aware that the Nazis were developing flying saucers, that the British Empire was very aware of this, British intelligence, and they shared that data with the United States, and also the Soviet Union was also able to get data that the Nazis had developed these flying saucers. And so as the war ends, all three went in there and basically pillaged the defeated Nazi German state of all of their resources and scientists that they could find, and took them back with them into their various countries to start developing these craft themselves. And of course, with the United States, this was called Operation Paperclip. And that's well substantiated. And they were able to develop their own secret space programs modeled on what the Nazis had achieved using these flying saucers. So from the very beginning, the thing we need to keep in mind with all of those three countries is that they basically piggybacked on what Nazi Germany had done and in the development of flying saucer technologies. And each of those three countries developed their own programs where over the successive decades they have more and more been able to develop and send off into space operational flying saucers and other anti-gravity craft. So what began in the 1930s and 40s as something that was primarily focused on extraterrestrial visitation and Nazi testing of these craft, over time became a phenomenon where different space programs were launching their own flying saucers, their own anti-gravity craft, while at the same time you had extraterrestrials visiting our world. So it became very complex. And so today, we can't say for certainty what it is that is being seen in the sky. Is it an extraterrestrial vehicle or does it belong to a secret space program?
Wow. There's so much goes on, Michael, isn't there? There's so much happened in our history, and then there's so much happened in the public response of how we've had to deal with it. That's what I like about exopolitics. It's getting to the root cause of the matter. It's getting to be honest with you, I didn't get exopolitics when I seen it first. I'm one of these truther guys, and I don't say truther in a derogatory sense. I like to look for the truth, although it is used in a derogatory sense. But I get so focused on, you know what? I'm glad exopolitics is there now because it's a necessary component, and I never got it at the start. I just wanted to get to facts, the nuts and bolts of the situation. Are they here? I'll deal with the situation myself. But we are in a global community. There are many humanitarian issues on the planet. But if we are being visited, I'm sure they're going to worry about the humanity of this planet. We may have even been, engineered in the past. I'm open to that. I do many shows on that. We may have been saved from cataclysms in the past. We don't even know our own history with respect to an ancient alien hypothesis. But this humanitarian issue that we have on our planet. I mean, are we going to wipe ourselves out, Michael? Do we bring that element into exopolitics? Are we about to wipe ourselves out as a nuclear race?
I don't think so. I think what's happened was that, as I said from the very beginning, when this phenomenon emerged in the 30s and 40s, with the various governments seeing that this was very real, that we both had extraterrestrial visitation, and that there were these advanced technologies that were pioneered by Nazi Germany. And so all of these things basically were secretly studied and not disclosed to the general public. And so this is something that became part of the classified world, the black budgets, the black programs, that all of those countries, the major countries, Britain, the United States, Russia, that they all had their own black programs where they were secretly studying these technologies, studying what the Nazis had done, and basically developing all of these things in cooperation, while at the same time, in the kind of open, or the kind of the world that we're aware of, you had the Cold War, and this was a very clever way in which they could kind of like keep everything secret, because everything to do with the Cold War became very highly classified. Psychological warfare, psychological operations were a key part of the Cold War effort. But this was not so much to do really with the capitalism versus communism, but it was more to basically hide the fact that these major countries that were involved in the Cold War all had their own secret space programs, and they were collaborating. They were working together to get to the top of this issue. And so in the kind of deepest sense, in the classified world of joint space program corporations, Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, they were cooperating, so that even though all of these countries were leaders in the development of nuclear weapons, and of course people were frantic over the possibility of a nuclear war, really at that deeper level, this was not going to happen, because these countries were cooperating. This was all a cover. This was how you could raise enormous black budget money to fund secret space programs. You had to do it with some kind of conflict that the general public took seriously enough not to deeply question, but that would enable you to raise trillions of dollars in the black budget. And just to give you an estimate, James, in 1988, 1999 in the United States, the estimate of the black budget that was raised to fund these secret programs, this was $1.7 trillion. And at that time, the Department of Defense budget in the United States was $300 billion. So we're talking like a secret space program being funded by a black budget, which was 5 times the size of the entire Department of Defense budget in the United States, which in itself was larger than the defense budgets of every other major nation on the planet back in that time, in the late 1990s. So that gives you an idea of the vast scope of these black programs and the budgets that fund them.
Wow. It's incredible. The money that's involved in this whole thing. I mean, people don't realize that the financial monopoly on this, the control of humanity, the control of governments, political structures, money that's involved, it's so interlinked in this whole thing. People just think that UFOs or extraterrestrial activity is just something separate that goes on, and it's either real or not real. And regardless of even if it's real or not real, it's affecting the planet. And it's interweaving itself into our society. Many people in America now are fully convinced that we're being visited by UFOs. The statistics has increased exponentially. I want to talk about your book, Michael, as well, Galactic Diplomacy. You talk about these three conventional political models for representing the Earth. Maybe we can get into this, Michael.
Sure. Well, when we're looking at the book Galactic Diplomacy, that starts off with the question, well, how do we deal with extraterrestrial visitors? I mean, who's going to represent us in relationships with extraterrestrial visitors? Is it going to be to the traditional model of states, where you actually have major states such as the United States, Russia, lesser extent Britain and so forth, basically setting up their own dialogue, their own communications with these extraterrestrial visitors? Or is it going to be something that is done through an international organization like the United Nations? This is something that was actually a subject of a meeting by the Royal Society. I believe it was in the year 2012 that the Royal Society actually actually it was 2010, that's right, yes. Royal Society organized a conference which was basically dealing with questions about, who would represent humanity with contact. And there was, at the time, the person who headed the outer space office for the United Nations came, and she addressed that question in London at the Royal Society meeting. And so that is another model, that the United Nations would represent humanity. Or would there be another model, a third model, which is kind of like basically private citizens? Do we have a role to play in all of this? Do we become citizen diplomats, and do we interact with extraterrestrials themselves directly in our own way, because they are interested in us? There have been many, many different examples of extraterrestrials having communications and having met with private citizens. So these are all forms of citizen diplomacy, or all forms of what I describe as a track 2 galactic diplomacy. That track 1 galactic diplomacy involves major states or organizations like the United Nations, but track 2 involves private citizens.
Let's talk about shadow governments as well. I know you get into that in the book. For me, this is the stuff that I actually care about. This is the clandestine, surreptitious, obsequious nature of political organizations that, it's the murky background to all this. It's an element that's there, and it's not going away. I have no doubt, Michael, that they are not going to disclose this unless they have to. No government would. It's not in their interest in any way. The only way they're going to disclose the truth, and I know disclosure goes hand in hand with exopolitics, but this government policy is not going to disclose anything, because they're going to lose control. They are going to lose control. I don't think it's going to be anarchy, Michael. I don't think it's going to be all out anarchy on the planet. I think people would be kind of somewhat sensible about it. And I think the governments would like to market it as an anarchy problem. But I think for the better part, if we knew where we're being visited, tangible evidence where we were shaking hands with these individuals on the street, I think that would certainly change the role of our own position on this planet. Our cosmos would be known to be bigger, if you will, Michael, rather than our internal problems and our in-house fighting on this little planet Earth. I think that's one of the things that just basically broaden the perspective of everybody. Let's talk about this shadow government aspect. How do we get rid of this? How do we educate people, Michael? How do we bring this into the discussion?
Oh, well, when you raise the question of the shadow government, or people describe as the cabal, the Illuminati. We need to think that this is not something new. This has been around for really millennia. There's a couple of really good books. There's William Bramley's The Gods of Eden, and also Jim Ma's Rule by Secrecy, which trace this basic lineage, this bloodline that goes back into antiquity, thousands of years ago. We're talking about ruling bloodline families that have had access to information, even secret technology, where they are able to prolong their lives for a long time. So we're talking about people, beings, bloodlines that have an extraordinary wealth, extraordinary knowledge, and that they have a lot of experience in controlling the human masses. And they are very good at manipulating humanity into kind of like creating war, poverty, disease, which ultimately disempowers us. That makes us kind of very easy for them to manipulate. And this has been going on for such a long time. And what we're seeing now, basically in the industrial age, since the 19th century with the industrialization, is the advent of technologies that have been used to kind of take us out of that vicious cycle of kind of war, poverty, disease, into a place where, we are not threatened as much by war. Poverty is not something that afflicts us day to day, and disease, we have a handle on it. So if you look at, our situation today in the early 21st century with the situation in the 19th century, things have improved a lot, and that's because of technology. And I think that what we are seeing now with these secret space programs that have been developed since the 30s and 40s, with the advent of extraterrestrial civilizations coming and visiting us, is more and more of these technologies being shared that basically put an end to this vicious cycle of poverty, war, and disease. And as those things are ended, then we become more empowered. This is the whole thing of consciousness empowering, or consciousness raising. Because the more we get out of those three things, the more we can step into our power. And then as we do that, as we're able to step into our power, not only are we better able to use these advanced technologies, we are then able to tap into these higher powers in our consciousness, where we can kind of do incredible things. So in a way, this whole development of secret space programs, extraterrestrial visitation, advanced technologies coming into human society, they help us overwhelm or to conquer these ancient problems of war, poverty, and disease. And in the process, we become more able to liberate ourselves of self-limiting belief systems that basically disempower us. And ultimately, what's going to happen is that the power of the Illuminati, the cabal, is weakened. Their control over us is weakened, which is why they're fighting tooth and nail to prevent these technologies coming out into the public arena, why they're trying to stop us from learning about our extraterrestrial brothers and sisters that are visiting us, and basically stopping things like free energy devices coming forward, because they know that the day we are able to end war, poverty, and disease on our planet, that the power of the cabal over us is ended.
Wow. Major thing is, I've had Nick Pope and I've had Robert Salas. I met Robert Salas in Stuttgart. I had a great chat with him. These guys have some really bizarre, interesting stories to tell us about government institutions being directly affected, nuclear disarmament, if you want to call it that, by UFOs. If that's the case, it puts the exopolitics into a different level. If you have to take this body of evidence on, I'm guessing the governments are going to be scared. I'm guessing it's to affect humanity so that we don't wipe ourselves out with nuclear disarmament. It makes us wake up to our own issues of nuclear threats. It brings our own politics of the world back into a different light again, Michael.
Well, raises really good questions about the issue of UFOs and nuclear weapons, and that kind of brings us back to this whole topic of national security. This issue of flying saucers, UFOs, has always been the highest national security consideration of all the major governments, because they realize what happened during the Second World War in terms of the power of these technologies and how Nazi Germany almost succeeded in being able to deploy these technologies to win the war. They got very, very close to doing that. And in fact, in terms of Operation High Jump, which was the expedition by Admiral Byrd to Antarctica to remove the remnants of the Nazi secret bases in Antarctica, that failed because the Nazis by that time were able to successfully operationalize these craft for use in military conflict. So this has always been the topmost national security issue, and so. And this is actually confirmed by Wilbert Smith, who was a senior radio engineer for the Canadian government in 1950. He wrote a top-secret memorandum to the Canadian Department of Transportation, basically saying that the flying saucer issue is the most classified topic in the United States, more highly classified than nuclear weapons. Wow. So that gives you an idea of the national security aspect to this issue. So yes, covering up the interest that UFOs have in nuclear weapons, it's just part of the whole national security secrecy surrounding this entire topic.
Do you think perhaps that's why we see a lot of nuclear decommissioning going on at the moment, that they know they're powerless when people can come in from another part of our galaxy and just disarm them?
I think that was also a big consideration behind the decommissioning, that these technologies, yes, as you said, the data basically shows how the UFOs could basically just appear next to a nuclear silo and disarm all of the nuclear weapons in there. So it was quite clear that these were not weapons that could ever be successfully used against extraterrestrials, because they could simply disarm them at their origin points. If these were weapons ever to be used, they were going to be used against humanity. But as I said earlier, that the secret cooperation between the governments at that highest level was always going to prevent a nuclear war happening between the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies. So the decommissioning basically came about because these were weapons that were kind of not ever going to be used. They really provided no defense against extraterrestrial visitors. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there are more powerful weapons that exist. These are weapons that involve torsion fields that are kind of temporal weapons that basically disrupt space-time. I mean, nuclear weapons disrupt the space-time continuum as well, which is part of the reason why extraterrestrials were very interested in them from the beginning. But there are other weapons that are even more destructive that are being secretly studied. So yes, nuclear weapons in a way is kind of like old technology that the major powers like that Russia and the United States see as really not having much of a function these days. Just very expensive to maintain.
Sure. Michael, tell me about you personally. I know you're a very learned guy. I'm looking at your qualifications. They're awesome. I know you've got a deep interest in government and politics and humanitarianism. Do you have any personal experiences? Why the attraction to exopolitics? Do you see this as the necessary component, and you're in a position to be in that driving seat to make this stuff happen? Is that a fair statement? We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to capricornradio.com for the free archives and capricornmembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grillen of Ailloch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox event alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noth and Doth, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tua de Danan's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the Tours Events page for more details at jamesswagger.com. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and don't forget to check out the archives at capricornmembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course you can still check out the free archives at capricornradio.com. And then HDTV shows as well on the Capricorn members page. But for now...
Well, it's very interesting. I think it's really just a continuation of an interest that I've held since I began my academic career in 1988-89 when I began doing my PhD in international conflict. I mean, I was looking at what is it that drives international conflict, and what is it that we can do to help resolve these conflicts at an international level. And so I did field work and studies in places like East Timor, in Kosovo, Sri Lanka. I was very interested in Kashmir as well. And all of these places, and Northern Ireland as well, something that also is a good example of conflicts. And so I was very interested in conflict and what it is that drives conflict and why these conflicts are so difficult to resolve. And through my interest in that, I came across the information about extraterrestrial technologies and extraterrestrial visitors and black budgets and secret programs and so forth. And I realized that this was just another layer of conflict, because I always thought that conflict was a dysfunctional aspect of a functional international system. In other words, that international conflict was something that was bad, or that occurred because there were people behind it who were crazies or were making poor choices, because by and large the international system was functional. You know, we had a United Nations, we had international parties to resolve things. But what I realized when I engaged with this information that Dr. Stephen Greer disclosed, and as I went deeper into that, I realized that actually international conflict is a functional aspect of a dysfunctional system. In other words, that the international system, rather than actually being harmonious and functional with the United Nations at its core to resolve things, actually is dysfunctional, that it's deliberately designed to manufacture international conflict. And so you actually manufacture these conflicts by having crazy people or having crazy ideological systems basically promoted by these deep black projects, because they need that to basically perpetuate international conflict so that they could create the cover so that they could continue to accumulate vast sums of money for secret programs that are run off the books without anyone knowing what's really going on.
Wow, you know, you're coming at you today from Northern Ireland, and it's funny, Michael, you know, I've watched the political process change here dynamically. We're living in relative peace here. consider to what it was about 20, 30 years ago. I mean, this place was like Beirut. It was a nightmare in Northern Ireland. Now there's relative peace. People just want to get on about their day-to-day business, make their money, feed their families, and I think they're over the past. They know they can't go back, and they used politics. Eventually, they got there, and I see the success of that type of politics, Michael. I lived with it. I lived through it. I just see it as a new type of politics today. I see like this global XL politics. I think it can work. I think there is a necessary component that governments, groups around the world, people know the truth. People are going to get to the truth. People, governments know that. The people know that. And the people, I think the more people that get involved, and the more people that get serious about this, I think the more we're going to see this thing develop. Would you see that? You see the growth as an important thing?
Definitely, because I think people are better appreciating now that every international conflict on our planet has behind it elements that manufacturing or driving it or making it difficult to resolve, and that the kind of the involvement of black programs in these is now something that people accept. Like the whole idea now of a false flag operation. Like 10 years ago when I first began working in this field, very few people were talking about false flag operations. Now, anything that happens, people are saying, oh, another false flag operation. And it's because people are being sensitized that international conflict is being driven by these covert entities that are basically manufacturing the conditions for new conflicts. And so in the Middle East at the moment, ISIS or ISIL. I mean, here it is. This is exactly an example of how an organization has been created out of nothing, the same as Al-Qaeda before that, created out of nothing through covert programs that are creating these entities so that they can create the conditions for international strife and conflict, so that the major powers can go into different areas of the world and basically pillage or find access to various or information that is there. In 2003, when the United States and its allies went into Iraq, I mean, that was because they wanted to get access to secret technologies that Saddam Hussein was able to basically get access to, and he was ready to reveal this to the world. So they went in there, they manufactured that whole conflict. And so I think a lot of people now are understanding that there are deeper levels of to analyzing these international conflicts, and at the deepest level is the exopolitical.
Sure. I got an interesting question in the chat room from Edward Delaray. I guess it's a double question. Do we have a list of these cabal groups, or is it as simple as royalty is ruling the world? Does it head back down to the royal families of the world?
I think it basically comes down to these ancient bloodlines, and they are very secretive organizations. They're not necessarily like the royal families, like the Windsors and so forth, that people kind of identify as being very powerful. In a way, these royal families are kind of like puppets or useful tools for these bloodline families to basically keep power. So they are doing it all behind the scenes, and that the cabal, the Illuminati, do operate in secrecy. They don't. People that are often associated with the cabal, people like David Rockefeller or Henry Kissinger, these are kind of like really intermediaries. They're useful tools for organizing, leading business people or political leaders or families or celebrities and so forth to attend events, whether it's Bilderberg or whether it's in San Francisco, various places where you have these elite gatherings, Bohemian Grove, for example. Oh, yeah. But really these bloodline families, they're the ones that have control, and they're very secretive, and very few of them are known publicly.
Wow. Let's mention Eisenhower. I know you get into this in the book as well. Eisenhower's secret meetings with the extraterrestrials. This is incredibly revealing, Michael.
Yes, well, very interesting that Eisenhower had meetings with extraterrestrials in 1954 and 1955. There are many whistleblowers that have come forward to talk about what happened at these meetings, and basically it said that the meetings began with the extraterrestrials being very concerned about the US developing thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, which were the most destructive form of nuclear weapon, even today, 1,000 times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima that were fissile or fission nuclear weapons. These fusion nuclear weapons or thermonuclear weapons were just so much more powerful, and the extraterrestrials wanted the US to stop developing that because these were destructive not only potentially for humanity but also for the extraterrestrial visitors themselves. Eisenhower was advised by his advisors not to agree to the requests of the extraterrestrials at that first meeting in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base.
Sure.
And then he had another meeting in 1955 at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, where they reached agreements basically to exchange technologies and to give the extraterrestrials certain rights in terms of establishing bases on the Earth and eventually being able to conduct genetic experiments with people. And so that's how you have the whole kind of abduction phenomenon taking off from that early period with Eisenhower. But Eisenhower, he felt that he was betrayed by the people who had advised him to reach these agreements with the extraterrestrial visitors. And by the end of his administration, he was very angry with the Majestic 12 group that were basically the ones that had pressured or advised Eisenhower to reach these agreements with the kind of more negative or kind of regressive extraterrestrial groups. And so Eisenhower at the very end, he was very upset with that. And he advised Kennedy. He told Kennedy what had happened because Kennedy also knew a little bit about the extraterrestrial visitors and the involvement of Nazi Germany and all of this. And so Eisenhower told Kennedy all about this. And so Kennedy, when he began his term of office, he was very intent on getting control.
Sure. I got another really great question here. I guess it's a racial question and a political question all in one. What can we say about the diversity of the extraterrestrials that are visiting this planet? Just like we have different racial groups on our own planet and different political nations or countries on our own planet from first, second and third world, ones that, are only caring about their agriculture and trying to feed their nations, and some are, more aggressive and warmongering, and the other ones are in the middle, the second world countries that are trying to develop. What can we say politically and racially about the extraterrestrials visiting our planet? What do we know, I guess, in a nutshell?
Oh, that's a really good question, James. What I know, what I've discovered is basically that there are 22 different extraterrestrial civilizations that have seeded humanity with their genetics. And so that means that these 22 different races have been monitoring humanity for hundreds of thousands of years, or however long they've been conducting their genetic experiments. And this accounts for the different racial subgroups on the planet. And so you will have one group of extraterrestrials kind of like being more interested in, say, the development of, say, the Northern European kind of racial groups because they are related. So that would be say the Lyran or the Pleiadians would be more interested in, say, the Scandinavian or the Northern Germanics. You would have another group, say beings from Sirius B or the Sirian star system being more interested in, say, the development of humans in, say, the Indian subcontinent. Then you have those that are, say, more interested in Asian groups, and then you have those that are interested in, say, African genetics and so forth. So I think when you look at all of the different racial groups on planet Earth, you can connect most of those, or virtually all of them, to different extraterrestrial visitors. The only exception that I have been told is that in Africa, that there is genetics that is indigenous to the Earth. So if we were talking about, who are the indigenous peoples of the planet, we would look at maybe the Africans or certain African subgroups as being truly indigenous to the Earth. But virtually everyone else has, to more or less a greater degree, different extraterrestrial genetics as part of their DNA. And there are two people that have talked about this. Alex Collier has talked about this at length in terms of what he was told by a group of extraterrestrials called the Andromedans. And then there's another whistleblower, more recent, Corey Good, who has worked with secret space programs, and he has been attending meetings. He calls them Super Federation meetings involving human-looking extraterrestrials, and he says that at these meetings, they are basically in charge of these. They're conducting 22 different genetic experiments that go back hundreds of thousands of years, 250,000 years in particular. That's the timeline he gives. And at these meetings, that there are between 40 to as many as 100 different human-looking extraterrestrials that are attending these meetings. So when we look at the human genome, humanity, there are many different varieties. He said that some of the beings on attending these meetings don't look like humans on Earth. Like they have bright orange skin and blue eyes and so forth. So, these aren't similar to any particular racial group on the planet. So there are many more racial groups that are kind of human-looking that are attending these Super Federation meetings, according to Corey Good. But that on Earth itself, there are 22 different ET genetics experiments that are being conducted and are being observed.
Sure. In your own opinion, I guess, Michael, do you think there's any particular extraterrestrial group that are going to physically harm us? Do you think there's any of these guys bad? And I mean inherently bad. I don't mean somewhere, in the middle, benevolent or something. I mean seriously, out to manipulate or control.
I don't think so, because when you look at all of the data, I mean, this is the series Ancient Aliens. I mean, that kind of shows you the data that goes back thousands of years ago. That extraterrestrials have been visiting us, that they were worshipped as gods by ancestors, and they gave us advanced technologies. And at certain times in history, we had our own really technologically sophisticated societies that had their own space programs. That the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Indians, the ancient Mayans, all of these groups had their own advanced technological societies, and that they were as successful in establishing space programs that were able to go off into space and develop their own colonies. This is something that Corey Good talks about at length in his disclosures. So, when you look at all of that literature, the question of are extraterrestrials going to kind of invade us and take us over, in a way, that's kind of like, it's not really representative of the true history of humanity. They've been here for so long. They have so many different extraterrestrial experiments going on here. As I said, there are 22 different extraterrestrial races that have long-term interest in humanity. So if you have a new group of extraterrestrials coming along here, it's like, it's not as though they can sort of come in, look at these primitive humans, we can take them over. It's like they get pushed back to the queue and say, hey, we've been here for 300,000 years, we've been doing our stuff, you get back to the end of the queue here,
Sure.
You wait your turn. That's really, I think, what's going on.
Sure. A question again from Edward Della Ray. He says, do we know of any physical artifacts that are publicly known as being extraterrestrial? Do you look at this tangible evidence, Michael? I mean, there's some bizarre out-of-place artifacts on this planet. Do you draw any evidence towards that?
Well, there's a few things that we could draw attention to. One is like the pyramids, the pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramids.
Oh, yeah.
You look at the construction of those, and it's like, well, clearly this was developed by a society with advanced technologies. Now, was it purely a function of an Egyptian society that had technology that was far in excess of what we know of today? I mean, some of those blocks that would build the pyramids. And you have the same thing in Baalbek in Lebanon. Some of these blocks are like, like I think the biggest ones in Baalbek are like 1,000 tons or 1,200 tons. Even now, even the most advanced construction equipment would have extreme difficulty if it could actually, lift one of these big building blocks. But here they are in ancient Egypt or in places like Baalbek in Lebanon.
Oh, yeah.
They were building facilities using these huge blocks. So clearly they had advanced technologies. So I think we can look at those sites, Baalbek in Lebanon or the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and basically say, well, there's every reason to think that these are, if not advanced kind of extraterrestrial technologies, then at the very least the technologies of an advanced or civilization that at one point inhabited that part of the world. And then of course, we could look at other things more recently, like the glyphs in Peru, the Nazca lines, those big glyphs there, in terms of, well, again, is this something that was built by kind of primitive humans for kind of decoration, or was this built because it serves some function for some kind of extraterrestrial or advanced technological society? The Ancient Aliens series, I think, does a really good job in bringing out all of these anomalies that are probably artifacts going back thousands of years to various different extraterrestrial races.
Mm. Wow. What about the Fukushima disaster? Does that affect the exopolitical discussion? Are extraterrestrials interested in that? People think there's a conspiracy that the Americans made that happen with HARP technology? If they had HARP technology, why wouldn't they create a disaster to topple another country? I've no issues with that. I'm saying whether that's true or false. But is that an exopolitical argument? Do we see that? Again, it's nuclear. It's a disaster. It's going to affect the whole planet.
Oh, definitely, yes. It's very much an exopolitical question, because you've got to go beneath the surface level of looking at, well, what really happened here. And I think there's been some really good research done on showing that this was a manufactured tsunami, that this was really a false flag operation. And so once again, we're in that issue of false flag operations and a secret government or a kind of or some assets of the Cabal, Illuminati, ruling bloodline families basically orchestrated the Fukushima crisis, mm-hmm. or the tsunami that basically destroyed the nuclear facilities there. They wanted to put pressure on the Japanese government that was showing signs that it was not going to cooperate any longer in terms of the kind of agenda of the Cabal, Illuminati, that the Japanese government, for one thing, the Japanese government provides enormous amounts of money for the funding of black programs that is run by the Cabal, Illuminati in their own secret space programs. So they basically been milking the Japanese for decades. And every Japanese prime minister wants to try and kind of cut back on this and try and assert greater Japanese independence from these Cabal, from the shadow government. And they are kind of like shown in no uncertain terms, where the real power is and what can happen. And so Fukushima was really a demonstration to the Japanese leadership saying, look, this is what we can do to you. You're really only a small mm-hmm. island. And if you're not careful, we'll do this and we'll make Japan uninhabitable. If you cooperate with us, then we'll make sure nothing happens to Japan. And by the way, we'll organize it so that you get to have the Olympic Games in 2020.
Wow. Michael, we're coming up to the top of the hour and the end of the show. We've got 5 minutes to go. I guess, first of all, just give people out some of the names of your books. You've got many there, and where we can get a copy of them.
Sure. Well, you can go to exopolitics.org. That's my main website, exopolitics.org, and there you'll find information on all the books. The two books that I would really kind of like recommend that are kind of more recent, both came out in 2013. One is Galactic Diplomacy. Sure. You've already mentioned that. Yeah. The other is Kennedy's Last Stand. And that's, I think, a very important book because it basically goes into how the secret government organized for President Kennedy to be assassinated because he was trying to get access to classified UFO files. So that's something you'll find more information at the website, or just go to Amazon.com and just kind of type in my name and you'll see all my books come up and you'll see Kennedy's Last Stand there. So yeah, I think that's all they need to do. Just go and exopolitics.org. I also have the latest information on this new whistleblower who's recently come forward, Corey Good, who has some incredible information about the secret space program. So I've got a lot of articles and a resource page on exopolitics.org where you could find out more about Corey Good's testimony.
Sure. I think I heard a show with him and David Wilcock on recently. I'm trying to get a hold of the guys to get on the show. So yeah, I'm definitely going to check into that. Actually, Michael, I stayed clear of your book, Kennedy's Last Stand, Eisenhower, UFOs, MJ-12 and JFK's assassination, because I want you to come back on the show and maybe discuss that book in the not too distant future. But yeah, looks fascinating. And you know, I see you getting into these issues, Michael, which are going to be labeled conspiratorial. They're going to be labeled alternative, whatever. But I see you doing this from a very sane, a very logical, a very thorough research perspective. And I think it's for the betterment of humanity to discuss this stuff. But I guess to maybe wrap things up, did you ever see the success of the exopolitics movement when you started all this, Michael?
I knew that eventually exopolitics would be accepted because it's a discipline. It's like exobiology or exoplanetology. It's a discipline of learning. It goes beyond any particular individual or movement that's associated with it. It's a discipline that its time will come because eventually people will embrace the idea that extraterrestrials are real, and so there's going to be a political element to it. So you're going to call that something like exopolitics, and that's probably the most logical term, and that's the one I kind of embraced back in 2002, 2003, and have been promoting ever since. But yes, I think exopolitics, it's a movement, it's a discipline, its time has come, and it'll continue to grow. And eventually, every university in Northern Ireland and around the world will have professors teaching exopolitics.
For sure.
And in particular, peace and conflict resolution, which was something that I was very interested in. And the more I studied it, the more it became very integral to understanding what it is that creates international conflict. And unfortunately, that interest was not something that was shared by my academic colleagues who thought that I'd really kind of like lost it. And that led to me eventually being kind of forced out of the university system that I'd been involved in teaching or researching for a couple of decades, really. And I have since been involved in promoting exopolitics as a new discipline and started up that 501c3 organization, the Exopolitics Institute, and continue to write and research and organize courses and events concerning exopolitics.
Oh, wonderful. Of course, you have several books out, so much stuff in there. I guess, Michael, for me, there is a need. There's so much stuff. I mean, people can focus on UFO cases from conspiratorial to physical evidence to testimony, but inevitably, you know, there's famous cases like Roswell, and that's to name a few, and the Phoenix Lights, and, you know, people kind of flock to this stuff in terms of almost an obsession in terms of research. I can understand that because people want to know, first and foremost, number one, are we being visited? Number two, is the whole thing real? Looking at the evidence, that you can brush some of it away, but you can't brush it all away. But inevitably, when you get past all that, the reality of it, you're going to have to deal with, okay, why are they here? What are we going to do about it? And whether subgroups on the planet or what are we going to do with them when we come face to face? Are they wanting to meet with us? Are they want us to shake hands? Are they want to talk to us? I mean, is this the nature of exopolitics? Are these the serious questions we have got to grapple with?
That's exactly right, James, because what distinguishes exopolitics from ufology is that ufology
and that's where we're taking a call from today. So, hi, Michael, you're very welcome to the show.
Hi, and aloha, James.
Oh, aloha to you. Wow, what a beautiful part of the world you're in, Michael.
I'm on the big island of Hawaii, and it is really wonderful being here, and today's a beautiful Hawaii day.
Wow, Michael, great to hear your voice. Great to talk to you today. I've had so many requests to get you on the show, and I get swamped now. I can only do so many, but I got you here today. It's exciting for me because there's something very genuine about what you're doing, Michael. There's something very genuine, not only a non-profit organization, I understand that part, but there is a need for extraterrestrial political discussions, this exopolitics. And like I say, I don't know if it's fair to say you started the whole thing, but to say you pioneered it. There's so many groups, exopolitics around the world now. Tell me about the inception of the exopolitics infrastructure, I guess, first and foremost.
Sure. Well, for me, I was very interested in the political implications of extraterrestrial life when I first was introduced to this subject in May of 2001. I was very interested in how this impacted international politics, because that was the field of study that I was involved in, and I was actually teaching at American University in international politics. And so it was very natural for me to kind of look at the information that I had been introduced to through Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project and see, well, how does this impact international conflict? And he went in there and basically pillaged the defeated Nazi German state of all of their resources and scientists that they could find, and took them back with them into their various countries to start developing these craft themselves. And of course, with the United States, this was called Operation Paperclip, and that's well substantiated. And they were able to develop their own secret space programs modeled on what the Nazis had achieved using these flying saucers. So from the very beginning, the thing we need to keep in mind with all of those three countries is that they basically piggybacked on what Nazi Germany had done and in the development of flying saucer technologies. And each of those three countries developed their own programs where over the successive decades they have more and more been able to develop and send off into space operational flying saucers and other anti-gravity craft. So what began in the 1930s and 40s as something that was primarily focused on extraterrestrial visitation and Nazi testing of these craft, over time became a phenomenon where different space programs were launching their own flying saucers, their own anti-gravity craft, while at the same time you had extraterrestrials visiting our world. So it became very complex. And so today, we can't say for certainty what it is that is being seen in the sky. Is it an extraterrestrial vehicle, or does it belong to a secret space program?
Wow. There's so much goes on, Michael, isn't there? There's so much happened in our history, and then there's so much happened in the public response of how we've had to deal with it. That's what I like about exopolitics. It's getting to the root cause of the matter. It's getting to be honest with you, I didn't get exopolitics when I seen it first. I'm one of these truther guys, and I don't say truther in a derogatory sense. I like to look for the truth, although it is used in a derogatory sense. But I get so focused on, you know what? I'm glad exopolitics is there now, because
he is pretty much interested in the phenomenon of UFOs, accumulating data, evidence that this is a real phenomenon and that there is something worthy of deeper study and analysis in this phenomenon. And that's been going on for 6 decades now, since 1947. And basically exopolitics takes a different approach, which is, okay, we have all of this data. Let's start analyzing it. Let's start putting together all of the testimonies of whistleblowers, contactees, leaked documents that take us beyond the purely kind of scientific analysis of UFO data into this realm of understanding, well, why are they here? Who's in these craft? What are they doing? Why are they contacting people? What do we understand about the different relations between these visitors with various governments and even amongst themselves? Is this something that promotes international peace, or is this something that promotes war and conflict? I mean, these are all the sort of questions that exopolitics needs to deal with. And more people are now becoming drawn to exopolitics because I think for a lot of people now, they have answered the question for themselves. Are UFO reals, and is there a substantive extraterrestrial component to this phenomenon? A lot of people have answered that question satisfactorily for themselves in terms of their own research, and now they're going into the deeper questions of, who are they, why are they here, what are they doing with us, and what are we doing in response?
Sure. Let's talk about individual countries. Obviously, exopolitics is a global phenomena. That's sprung up in several different countries. Each one has their own. Each country seems to have their own set of subgroups. And yeah, I mean, we can refer to you exopolitics.org to your website, Michael, if people want to see what this is all about. But inevitably, each country has their own mandate. How they're going to deal with this problem, because it is a problem. I mean, first of all, governments haven't acknowledged to their public dominion that this stuff is real. I think they're trying to slowly go through a disclosure process to ease the blow as such. But inevitably, let's talk, for example, UK, USA, Russia, three of the big ones. There's going to be a lot of different ways that each country handles either disclosure or managing the truth, if you want to call it that way. Or so what has exopolitics got to do with each country? Maybe talk about those three countries in particular. What's the exopolitics in the individual countries, and then maybe paint out how they three can get on a global scene and discuss things.
Sure. Well, when we're looking at those three countries in particular, Britain, the United States, and the Russian Federation, what we have to understand is that they were the victors from the Second World War. And when they went into the defeated Nazi Germany and started to look into what top secret projects the Nazis had been working on, they found that the Nazis had actually developed flying saucers, that the Nazis were the first to develop these craft. And they had done it successfully because they had been able to accumulate data beginning in the 1920s on these advanced craft that were found in the literatures of ancient societies, and also with communications with certain extraterrestrial civilizations. So this was something that became known to these different countries. Britain, in particular, in the late 1930s, they were aware that the Nazis were developing flying saucers, that the British Empire was very aware of this, British intelligence, and they shared that data with the United States, and also the Soviet Union was also able to get data that the Nazis had developed these flying saucers. And so as the war ends, all three